Hello, and welcome back to Secret Sonics. I'm your host, Ben Wallach. My guest today is Bob Horn. Bob is a multi-platinum, Grammy Award-winning mix engineer known for working with artists spanning many genres: R&B, pop, hip-hop, rock, adult contemporary, and jazz, as well as artists from countries around the globe, including the US, Korea, Japan, Australia, Spain, Indonesia, Brazil, and China. Some of those artists include BTS, Usher, Timbaland, Michael Jackson, Neo, Marshmello. Man, this list is just crazy. Kelly Clarkson, Everclear, just goes on and on. Wow. Former guest of the show, Nicholas DiLorenzo, recommended actually put me in touch with Bob, who's graciously agreed to join me on the air. So with all that to say, welcome to Secret Sonics, Bob.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's a total pleasure.
Absolutely.
And I also interviewed your assistant, Shaq. So
Yeah.
I feel like we're super connected now.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks for having me, man.
It's an absolute pleasure. I'd love to hear a bit about your story. How did things get started? I know you already mentioned to me that you're also a bass player, which is always fun to hear. Like, tell me a bit about your background, how you ended up getting to the place that you are today and doing the things you're doing.
Yeah, so, like a lot of kids in America, once you get to 4th or 5th grade, you have to choose if you want to be in band or choir or orchestra in school, and I chose band. And my dad had a saxophone, tenor saxophone, and in the attic. So he gave that to me, and I started playing Three Blind Mice and those little nursery rhyme songs in school band, and kind of got into music. And then I discovered jazz band at school, and right around that time we moved houses, and that house was my grandparents, and they had a piano. So I started playing piano just because it was there, and I was already playing saxophone, and it just kind of snowballed. And then we had an exchange student come visit, live with us for about a year, and he played drums. So I started playing drums, and then my cousin had guitars and basses, and he let me take one home for an extended period of time. And so I eventually, by the time I was in high school, I was playing guitar, drums, bass, piano, and sax. And throughout high school, I had bands. Like every day after school, I would have a band rehearsal in like 4 different bands, and I played different instruments and
That's so
each
funny.
one. And then in school, I played the saxophone, and I just got into it. And then, of course, you want to learn how to record your bands. And I was doing live sound at my church. And so I got into all the PA equipment and started collecting microphones and cables and mixers and 4-track recording and all that stuff. And by the time it was time to choose a college to go to, I chose Berklee College of Music, and I went for electric bass and engineering. So I focused on that for 4 years up at Berklee. And then after that, when I graduated, I went to Nashville for about 3 years. I started my assistant career and all that. And then eventually I spent like a year in North Carolina with James Brown.
What?
And some other, and I didn't spend the whole year with him, but I was there working with him, and then a bunch of other artists at this studio called Reflections, and saving up money to kind of move out here. So that was kind of my in between Nashville and LA story. And then after that, my parents also lived there. So while I was saving, that's why I went to that Charlotte, North Carolina. Worked there a little bit, came out here to LA in 2001, I believe, and then started my career just being an engineer mixer. Eventually, I met this guy named Ron Feemster. His nickname is Nephew, and he's a R&B hip hop producer. And I was with him every day for like 5 years. I was his engineer and his mixer, and would do everything that he was doing. So he had just worked for Eminem and 50 Cent. So he was like just kind of skyrocketing his career. So jumped on his coattails. I was his day-to-day guy. We had a elaborate home studio that looked like Guitar Center with all the keyboards that he owned and huge Pro Tools rig. And then we would also work in some of the big SSL rooms a lot. And I also played a lot of guitar and bass for him on his tracks, and got to work with a bunch of big artists really quick just because of his success. And mixed most everything he did.
Wow.
And yeah, man. So I just built that probably up to about 2007, and then I kind of went independent, and I've been doing that ever since.
Yeah.
So.
What made you switch from like primarily musician to primarily audio engineer? What was that transition like?
It was kind of like I liked being a musician. I liked being in bands. I had a band that toured around the Northeast area when I was in college, but I think I don't know. I feared being a struggling bass player the rest of my life, and I was already into all the gear aspect and the PA systems. And once I got to I interned a couple studios in Cincinnati before I went to college, and they had Neves and SSLs, and learned about those. I was already starting to learn about the studio mics and all that stuff. And then when I got to Berkeley, I got all this time, they call it practice time after class. You can book out time and work on the boards, record bands and stuff. So I was just really getting deep into the recording aspect, and I really loved it. And I just felt like it was more my passion than performing. So, I went to Nashville. I was excited because Nashville was heavily into, bands and recording like 5-6 musicians at a time. And
Yeah.
I had a knack for mic technique, and I wanted to learn more. And, they have a high turnaround of sessions, like where back then, early 2000s out here, I heard it was like all drum machines, and, they would groups would book out sessions for a long time, so you'd be with one artist for a really long time, but there in Nashville, it's like you work on a 2-day tracking session, get a whole album done, and then you're on to the next thing. And I enjoyed that. Also at the time in Nashville, assistants were freelance. They weren't staff at studios. There was a couple studios where they were staff, but majority of the studios at that time on Music Row were you were freelance already. So you had the flexibility of not only working at different studios, which I probably worked at, 30 or 40 in Nashville. You also had the flexibility of suddenly being an engineer, overdubs or whatever, and not having to quit your job. Like that was in my early days, that was always the story. It's like, once you're ready to engineer, you got to quit your job at the studio, and then you got no money, so you got to plan it perfectly. And so Nashville kind of erased that line of assistant and engineer. And by the third year I was there, I was doing more engineering. So it was kind of a real easy, natural progression. And then when I moved out here, I just stayed engineer, no more assisting. And so that's kind of how I came up to where I'm at now.
I mean, it sounds like you just did so many reps, like in Nashville, like with all those studios and like, you just got those chops really quick because you're just constantly learning new things and new studios, like every day a new studio. Like that's crazy.
The engineers and musicians in Nashville at the time, I haven't been there, in about 20 years, but I mean, it was amazing. Like so many great engineers, and what's great is like assisting so many guys like that. You really get to pick and choose what you like and what you think is good, what you think is bad. And, it's like you assist, 60, 70 engineers, like you really learn a lot, So that was perfect,
That's amazing.
That's really cool.
And then when you started working for like Nephew, I guess you kind of transitioned more into like R&B and more modern, I guess, production stuff. What was that like? And did you have any?
What's funny is, I always listened to it. And I was in Nashville working on country and contemporary Christian records, but I was listening to TLC No Scrubs. I was listening to all this R&B stuff in my car driving to work. So. And I was buying those CDs. CDs were the thing at the time, and I was really into R&B, but I was never working on it over there. And so when I came out here and I got into that, I was kind of really excited, and I don't know, I definitely enjoyed the transition, and occasionally the way it is now, like I think I'm known mostly for R&B, hip hop, pop stuff, K-pop, but I get these sessions every once in a while, whether it's smooth jazz. I just know a bunch of people in that world, and I get peppered in these songs with live drums and bass and instruments. So it's just kind of refresher and just good for your soul. It's like I
Yeah.
just mixed a blues album in October. I mixed a blues album that was really cool. It was total good for the soul departure from the not. It's not mundane, but every day it's like, oh, I'm doing this again. I'm doing this again. Then it's like, oh wow, blues album. That's cool. Mix it up, reset my brain, and then once I come out of it and get back into pop stuff or whatever, you kind of feel refreshed. So
Yeah.
I've enjoyed that aspect of my career being multi genre.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting for sure.
Yeah, it is interesting. I feel so many people that are working on modern pop music, R&B music, hip hop come from like a rock background, or I feel like it's so common because
Yeah.
I guess when I imagine you're a bit older than me, but like when you were growing up, like that was what we were listening to back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
Before
Yeah, I
it
mean,
was the age
in
of hip hop.
Yeah, in my high school days, it was all Primus, Rush,
Oh
and
yeah,
the guitar players, all the solo guys, and solo bass players. I was like really into all that kind of stuff
yeah,
and
like
funk
Victor Wooten.
music and yeah.
Love it.
And then Soundgarden. Soundgarden was a big one for me in high school. Like I loved that.
Yeah,
So definitely very, very odd and varied musical taste for me, like over the years. So
all the genres have influenced you, and
yeah. Yeah.
have you had any like mentors that kind of helped, I don't know, either guide you or like give you some sort of aesthetic or help you figure out how to mix for kind of more modern genres? Or has it all been
Um,
like self-taught, freewheeling it and
it's
figuring it
okay.
out?
Well, it's self. How should I say this? My clients are the ones who have taught me basically
Yeah.
with their mix notes.
Mm.
And nephew was very instrumental in that, just learning what a person likes. And nephew and I got to the point where he would be making a beat behind me. I'm sitting at Pro Tools, and just musically, I would be like, he's about to ask me for a timpani track, which always meant the Motif 6 keyboard by Yamaha, and that's where he got his timpani. So he would be making this beat, and I would just make a track, label it timpani, set the input to Motif 6, and 9 times out of 10, he'd be like, okay, give me a timpani track. And I would just arm it, and here we go. So like over 5 years, I learned him so well
Yeah.
that, like a lot of his taste got ingrained in me. And then other people like the Avila brothers, like their production and how their style is. Every person, whether they're an artist or producer, I have to learn them if they're going to be a repeat client for me. And this guy, he doesn't like a lot of reverb on his vocal, and this guy does, and this guy hates this, and this guy, Usher, hates effects on his vocals that aren't reverb and delay. So if you put a flanger on his vocal, you're wasting your time because he's going to ask you to take it back off. Like learning all those things from so many people over the years
Mm-hmm.
is really what molded me, and I'm thankful. Like I think most mixers, they hate when they get mix notes, and I'm with them. Like I get that they didn't love mix one. It's like I got to adjust it. I think it's perfect. I have that moment, but then depending on who it is and what they're asking for, a lot of times I learn something. Sometimes I do something and I still think I disagree with that, but they're the clients, so let me go with it. And then other times I try to talk them out of it, and then other times I'm like, oh wow, yeah, that is cool, that is a good thing they did right there. So yeah, now I have that in my brain for next time. So
Yeah, I love that. By the way, I love that so much. And I'm also a big fan of mixed notes. Like, I know some people don't like it, but really is like that's serving the song because the artist knows what it needs to sound like better than the mixer does at the end of the day.
yeah, absolutely. And so I'd say my clients molded me a lot. Some other guys like Brian Culbertson, he is smooth jazz R&B, but his stuff is pretty funky, and I learned so much working with him because we've done probably over 400 songs together, and
My God.
I was really able to take what I learned with him into other genres, just because from a technical aspect, so balance and certain things he likes, and I learned him over the years, and it's like, wow, so now I can mix his records and pretty much nail them really close, before I give them back to him, and then we have little things to do on the tweaking end. But he had a great ear, and even though it's a genre that I work on rarely, I was able to take those techniques and bring them into other genres, and they fit perfectly. So, yeah, I would say, just to wrap that up. Sorry for the long answer, but
No, it's great.
it's basically the clients that have molded me.
I love that answer. It's great, and I know that I get a sense that you're really good at communication. Just our email exchange was so like communicative and
Oh,
yeah, like I don't know. I feel like that may be one of your secret sauces, so to speak. Like I don't know. You seem to
uh,
like give off like
yeah, and
you
my
know
pet peeve when people can't communicate. Yeah, that's absolutely. You're
yeah
right with that. I never thought about that, but yeah,
yeah. So
yeah,
communication is the key
yeah, for sure.
in terms of like how you run your business. Do you book everything yourself? Do you have management? What does that look like?
I do have management, and she handles probably 60% of what I do. I do work on I do have a high output of indie clients, and some of those she doesn't handle if the budget's just lower, and maybe I've known them for years, and it's just like, well, there's no negotiation to do, and they're just going to pay me cash app, and why bother you with this, because you're not going to make much, and blah blah blah. So I'll just handle those myself. But she does a good bit of stuff. Definitely handles my any client I feel like is going to need negotiation, and any client I feel like is going to be troublesome, and then any high end client, I definitely bring her in on those. So
Nice. So it's good to have that
yeah,
balance of like you having those communication skills and also bringing in a little help when you need it.
yeah, and then uh, so you interviewed Shaq. You mentioned my assistant. He has a lot of systems for organizations, and he's really good at that stuff. And he actually developed a Excel thing for me that
Mm.
helps us communicate, because the way we work is he's a morning person, I'm an afternoon person. I work late and sleep late, so he comes in before me, does stuff, and then he'll notate on this Excel sheet, where the project's at. So if the night before I'm like, I'll check a box that's like print stems on this, and you know this mix is approved, this one's not, and he'll come in the next morning, open that. It actually opens when the computer started on its own, but he'll see if there's something to do or not, or something that's pressing, and then I'll see if he changed anything and I need to address anything. So Shaq's really good at those kind of organization systems. So yeah, we run a pretty, I guess, a tight ship around here. It's not too loose, a little loose sometimes,
A
but
little loose. No, no,
yeah.
it sounds like you're running a totally tight ship. Amazing. Well, I usually ask people about how they like find new artists to work with, but I feel like with you, you already have like such a name that it just kind of it's word of mouth or people reaching out to your
My whole life
manager.
has been word of mouth. I've never, I mean, cold calling a client, or even, DMing them on IG or something like that has worked. Oh my God. I don't even think 1% like that. I think under 5 times in my life has that actually worked and developed into a working relationship. This one reggae band named Common Kings, and they're local, but they're really well known in like Australia and places like that, and New Zealand. And uh, I I met them. They were here doing a recording for a microphone company named Lewitt. They were here at our
Mm,
studio,
yeah.
and I heard their music. I was like, I gotta mix with you guys. And luckily, they didn't have anything to mix. But luckily, like 6 months later, they remembered me begging to work with them, and they came back, and I've had a relationship with them for years. And um, but
That's
yeah,
great.
it's like very rare does that work. Like everything with me is word of mouth, recommendations, so I really rely on clients telling their friends. And there might be a couple like where people, probably more than I realize, but the thing where people listen to something, find out who mixed it, and then reach out to me, find me on the internet. I think that happens, but it's more in the indie world, I guess.
Yeah,
So
totally.
yeah, the bigger stuff is recommendation.
Yeah. I'm curious how you ended up working with BTS because that's such a Such
Ah,
a far out connection. Like how did that begin? How did the process of working with BTS begin for you?
um, so it's kind of two aspects to BTS. So I had some K-pop credits already, but that's not how they found me. But I think that made them more comfortable when they discovered me. But so Dave Pensado I used to work with him as far as
Oh yeah.
in my studio. So he and I shared this room that I'm in right now for about 6 months and did a daytime nighttime thing. And then after about 6 months, I needed my room back full time, and he moved over across the hall to my partner's room at the time, and he was in there for about a year and a half. So I spent a lot of time with Dave, and then after that, um, I met this guy who wanted to build a studio, and he built next door 4 rooms, and Dave told the guy, if you build Bob's room next door exactly, I'll be your first tenant. So we did that, and my room is very close to that room over there, design wise. And Dave even got the same Asperger's, and he was there for I think 2 to 3 years, no, maybe 3 to 4 years. But so Dave has been around me a lot, just physically, in same building and then next door, and the the label head for BTS, also the main manager, his name is Hitman Bang is how he's known. But he came to visit Dave because they have a long history, and he needed I think he needed 2 things done. I think he needed mixes and he needed horns recorded. And this was before BTS was mega famous, and um I think Eric did the horn recording in our live room, and my old partner, and then I did a mix for him because Dave was too busy at the time, and I just started the relationship with him, and I ended up doing a couple songs on every album, and they just grew and grew and grew. Next thing you know, they were BTS and mega superstars. So that's kind of how that happened.
Yeah, you got just one foot in the door at the right time, and then we're there.
Yeah, that was right time, right place. If I
Yeah.
hadn't been here that day, he would have left and hired someone else because Dave was busy and I would never have met him. So
That's so
yeah,
interesting. It's like these crazy
yeah,
big opportunities. You never know when they're gonna come or when they're gonna present themselves. You just kind of like at some point you'll be ready for a big opportunity, and you just have to just jump on it.
absolutely. Like when I was at Berkeley, I was just thinking, oh, it's like you do something. I was looking at credits, of CDs, and they always had the mix engineer. I was like, oh, Chris Lord-Alge, oh, Bob Claremountain, and oh, Dave Way, and I was excited. So that made me think, oh, people look at your credits and they like how it sounds and they call you and hire you. And then I got out of there and found out that's not how it works. And especially today when we don't really have solid credits out there
That's
because a
yeah,
lot of times
very
people
good
forget.
point. Yeah.
It's all relationships and personality and making sure you're a decent hang on the sessions or around people, and you're not rude and you're not off-putting, about mix notes. And so it's all relationships and, getting to know people, and people hire their friends. That's what they want to do. So if you're
Yeah.
friends with 10 A&R guys, you're probably in a good position. If you're friends with 10 producers and they like the work you do, they're going to call you first if they, have the opportunity. So, and I kind of realized as I was going that there's engineers that are friends with artists, there's engineers that are friends with the labels, and there's engineers that are friends with producers. And I am mostly a producer friend and a little bit of an artist friend. So A&R is where I want to get to know more and more A&Rs and have a whole Rolodex of A&Rs. But that, I think for me, it's been more with the artists. So
Yeah. Well, same thing here because I'm only working on indie music. So, but yeah, totally. That artist relationship is so important. Yeah.
absolutely.
Can't
Yeah.
emphasize that enough. Let's get a little bit into the technical. Like I love
Okay.
I would, if I had to like say like something juts out in your mixes, I would say it's like pristine vocal, massive low end. Like those are like the two things that I'm hearing.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear a little bit about your thought process. When you start a mix, I don't know what's the first thing you do.
The first thing I do is listen to the song probably twice, and I start familiarizing myself with the tracks. Like as a mixer that doesn't do tracking hardly ever, um, and especially not the song I'm mixing most of the time, I'm not familiar with the production. So I can hear it as a song and hear the lyrics and hear the instrumentation and kind of guess, but I need to know the inner workings of all the tracks and hear like, oh, there's this weird percussion thing, and these three percussion things make up this loop that gives it this feel. So I need to okay, and then I go track by track and see what's in the song, you know, and we have a system of organization and color coding tracks, you know, in Pro Tools, and Shaq does that for me on setup, and then I come in and all that's done. So I don't even have to look at names of tracks. I just see colors and be like, oh, red, that's a guitar. Like, let me look at that. Okay, that's not as important. This piano's more important. And so once I get caught up to speed on those kind of things, then I feel like I can mix the song. So a lot of times I check out the lead vocal, and a lot of times I start with the meat and potatoes of a song. So the basically what would be considered the rhythm section of a band. But even if it's a program song, you know, the main drums that have the groove, and then the bass, and then whatever main music sound, whether it's a guitar or a keyboard or a couple of keyboards, you know. And I get that going both at the close to the final level they'll sit in the end of the mix, and feeling good and just sounding good and similar to the rough but better. And then I'll a lot of times I'll work on the lead vocal and get that going. Once I get that going, I'll mute it, go back to working on other aspects, and you know, kind of the more ear candy keyboards and percussion stuff, and get that going. And then I have this situation where, or not situation, I have this technique where I have submasters. So I have a bass submaster, a drum submaster, a music submaster, so everything else but the bass, and then a vocal submaster. And I put these trim plugins on them. It's just the Pro Tools Avid trim, and I pull them down 12 dB, and I will turn those on and off. So instead of muting something or soloing something, once I get most of the stuff in and sounding right, if I want to get the lead vocal out of my ears so I can work on some guitars, I'll turn those trim plugins on, and then the vocal's there, but it's 12 dB down. So I'm still hearing the high end and how it works with the hi-hat and the S's versus the hi-hat and the shakers. And then I'll put it full level and check that, and I'll just go back and forth as I work, so that I'm not working out of context for too long.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, occasionally you got to solo something and hear a buzz, or you know, you just want to get everything out of your ears and work on it, and then you put it back in and make sure it fits. And I also do a lot of A/Bing, so I'll A/B an entire plugin, just bypass, unbypass, make sure that what I'm doing is beneficial, not hurting something, because something can sound good and then you realize later that you're actually doing a detriment to the sound, you know. So I do a lot of A/Bing, but then also sometimes I'll A/B individual bands. So if I got 3 bands on a Fab Filter Pro Q2, I will audition certain ones, just turn them on and off, and be like, oh, well, these bands are cool, but this one's unnecessary, so get rid of that, you know. And a lot of times I do A/B comparisons of different plugins. So if someone wants a reverb on a snare, I'll try 5 different ones, put them all in series, bypass them, and go one by one, and be like, oh, well, this one works today in this aspect in this song, and get rid of the other 4, instead of just going to the snare reverb that I always use. I don't believe in that. I believe in, auditioning stuff, and it might take a little longer. I don't do that with every plugin, but, you know, there's certain things where it's like, oh, well, let me try to beat what I just did and make it that much better, you know?
Yeah.
So,
that's
but a
interesting.
lot of times,
I find that no, it's all good. I find that sometimes I do a bunch of the A/Bing stuff just to see if I went too far often. Like, it's like, oh, I really I went too hard into that saturator, or I scooped too many mids or something. That's usually what I find out if I do stuff like that. So I'm assuming it's like a similar situation.
Yeah, and I have a odd brain during my mix process, and I know some people where they are very technical, or they're very musical, and I switch extremes, but I don't
Mm.
control it. It just happens. Like
Huh.
sometimes I'll be too technical, and then when my musical brain kicks in, it's like, oh, well, you were being too technical and you over EQ'd that. And other times I'm too feel, which sounds like that's not possible. Like great feel is great feel, but sometimes I'll be all about feel, and then I'll listen the next day and be like, oh, that could technically sound better, but even though the groove feels good or whatever, let me see if I can get both accomplished, you know? So sometimes I have that hang up where I get too on the feel side and it's like, oh, well, does feel good, but you know, that mid range is a little weird, a little ashy or a little processed technically, you know? So,
Right. Right.
I'm constantly battling the two and trying to find a balance in the middle. And sometimes a song comes out and it's technically great and only feels a little bit good, and other times it feels great and it could be technically better. So, you know, it's just for me, it's a crapshoot of which one it's gonna be. You know.
Yeah. Do you find that like taking some space, like distance, objectivity helps, like taking a day?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Even for even if my client is happy with the mix on mix one, a lot of times they still end up with mix two, and I will the next day or a couple hours later after listening, maybe I'll take an ear break, listen to it in the car, and come back or listen with fresh ears after watching a half hour of TV or something. And I'll be like, oh, you know what, this is better if I do this. So I'll print a mix two, send it to them with a little note saying, hey, see if you like this better. I think it is. And most of the time they're like, yeah, go with mix two, you know, even
Yeah.
though they were done, you know. So
Yeah.
um,
I love that. It's
yeah,
like so.
I'm
It's
just
so.
always
I mean, it's so reaffirming for me as like somebody who's not mixing the same kinds of records that you're mixing, to hear how similar some of those processes are. Like it's like, oh, keep on the path. If it works for
yeah. I
Bob.
mean, we want it all to we want repeat clients, and we want our work to sound impressive. And sometimes it's hard to let go where
Yeah.
you know, and we've all had those mixed notes where it's like the client wants this, and we're like, I don't really want my name on that though. And you know, you try to fight those battles, and then in the end, the A&R guy's like, nah, we want it like this. They put their foot down, and you're like, okay, well, here we go. And you know, you just have to let go and accept. You know,
You have to let go and accept. That is totally true. Yeah, it's a hard that's like a hard balance of like your reputation, like or like the I don't know what the word is, but the legacy of the work that you do. But at the end of the day, it's you're still a technician. You're not the artist, and so
right?
there's a limit to what you can control with these things.
Yeah, for sure.
Let's talk a bit about low end, because I love the low end on your records. And Shachar
Oh, thank you.
made me hip to like some voodoo tricks that you do with like EQing like the bass to the kick, or I don't even remember exactly what it was.
You told him my tricks, Shaq. We're talking about low end.
Low end?
Yeah, you tell me you're giving away my tricks.
Did
Yeah.
Did I give away too much?
No, not at all. I was joking, but yeah, low end is always my low end is Manny Marroquin's fault, because in my early days, I did a mix. An A&R guy gave me a shot on a mix, and I did the mix, and everything was great. They loved the vocals, they loved the keyboards, they loved the snare drum and the hi-hats, but they didn't love the kick and the bass, and they had Manny do it. And of course that hurt your ego, but now looking back, it's like, dude, you were like 23 years old, who cares, whatever. It's like you still have some time to grow. But
That is so true.
I humbled myself and I delivered the files to Manny myself. And while I was there, I asked him, it's like, would you be kind enough to listen to my mix and just tell me what you think is wrong with it, because I would just love to learn. And he said, you have no low end depth. It's like the low end's there, but it could be deeper and richer, and I forget the words he used now. But I immediately went out and bought a subwoofer, because I was an NS10 guy, and I don't know, I was just like, oh yeah, I'm not listening to, except on the mains when I'm in the SSL studios, I'm not really listening to the subs, and some studios are better than others, and some of the mains don't even sound that great. So I went out and bought these two little M audio subs because I wanted headroom, so I bought two of them, and they were small. And I put those every time I went to a studio. I would put those with the NS10s. So started mixing like that, and then it was like it's just life changing. It's like, oh well, now I'm hearing the low end, and it took me a while to get it. The subs dialed in at the right level. You know, every day you're in a different room, every week or whatever, and but I was finally like paying attention to it more in a different mindset. It's just he just opened that up for me. He probably doesn't even know, but yeah, I just started paying attention to it, and my mixes got way better. And there were some years where I had too much low end, and I probably still have too much, but
Well, that's okay.
you know,
That's like a flavor profile, you know.
yeah, it's like Jello. You can never have too much Jello, you know.
Yeah, I'm with you on the low end thing.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I mean, I just kind of because I lost a mix, it just made me really start to focus on it. And so over the years, I was just always about finding ways to get the best low end. And sometimes it's a struggle, and it all has to do with phase of what you're dealing with and the raw sounds. And that's why I have a collection of, thousands of bass drums I've collected over the years. And, I've even on some live basses, I've even snuck and played live bass parts over because the sound was so horrible. And
wow.
then I'll go by note by note and make the feel, look at the waveform and make the feel. This isn't something I do regularly. This has happened a couple times.
Emergency situations.
Yeah. But like the bass sound was so horrible that I would play it over and then match the waveform so that the feel was the same guy's feel. And also done stuff where I'll do a MIDI track on a synth bass, and I'll layer, a deep octave or trigger. If I hear the bass and I can find the patch, which is a miracle, I might just, maybe they put too many plugins on it and they can't give me the original when I ask for it. So if I do have that same patch and I can find it quickly, I will recreate that, but those are very extreme situations. But I've always been on this path for great low end because it's fun. Great low end is fun, it moves you, it feels good. It just makes the record sound cool. And, worked with, back in the day, I worked with Heavy D on some reggae stuff and learned more about low end from him. And, yeah, so it's just always been something I paid attention to, and I've come up with so many techniques and weird things that you wouldn't think of. Frequency masking, just moving a frequency in the mids or the high end, and all of a sudden your 40 hertz is more exposed. Stuff you wouldn't expect. And now that I know those things, I know how to look for them, and we got all these tools like Low End Focus by Isotope and different plugins, and they all sound different. And when I'm working, I'll hear in my head like, oh, this bass needs the UAD Legacy Pull Tech, and it's going to give me what I want. And I'll try it and be like, oh, it's not working today. Let me try this plugin. And then I'll hear it, and I'll find it and find what works to achieve what I hear in my head. And I that's one thing I do as a mixer is when I hear the production and the raw tracks, I hear the end result in my head, and then it's just about working to get there. And sometimes you never get there. It's just not possible what you want to happen, and you have to compromise mentally. But yeah, so that's kind of how I work with low end. There's not one thing I do. It's just many things.
Yeah, you have a bag of
every day.
You have a bag of tricks that you can reach out of. And depending on the situation, which one. Can you give us like a couple examples of those voodoo tricks that you do? You mentioned like taking out the low end and like in the bass, and then the sub, in the mids, and then the sub opens up.
Yeah, I mean it's really just about frequency masking, and you can have masking from things that aren't the bass or the kick, like a piano having too much lows and now it's covering the bass. That's something a lot of mixers already know about. But you also, within a sound, you can have one frequency that's just it's calling attention to your ears more, and you're hearing what you want less. So, um, you can, like, let's say you want a deeper, richer low end, and you end up having too much 130 hertz. So you dip that a little bit, and all of a sudden you hear 60, 50, and 40 easier, And sometimes it's just about experimentation. Sometimes I have a hunch. And I've had the weirdest things happen where it's like, oh, well, we want the kick to pop out. Where it's like, well, solo that guitar. And we listen to that guitar, but like, okay, pull out 80 on the guitar. Now, let's listen. Now all of a sudden the kick is more punchy. So it's just having your mind open to being ready for those kind of things. And it's not, that's why I say it's kind of voodoo, because it's not something you can do every mix the same way. It's always different. And the next song, you're not going to have that guitar that has too much 80 hertz. You're going to have a piano that has too much 30 and 40 that you don't need. And you got to, filter that out. And then the next time you're going to have it wide open. And then you have to approach a bass totally different, because now there's so much space. There's nothing in the way, So it's, and the other thing is about phase and checking polarity.
Yeah.
Timing is a big thing.
Yeah.
I've had instances where kick and bass are perfectly lined up on the grid, and they hit every downbeat at the same time. And that's not the way it needs to be for the best low end. And you shift the whole bass, to the right 20 milliseconds, all of a sudden it just gels better. Sometimes you grab auto align and throw that plugin on, and it just gels better. Sometimes auto aligning the bass with Rhodes, all of a sudden way better. Sometimes just flipping the polarity on the Rhodes helps the bass, So it's just more something you have to be prepared for and have an open mind about the technique, rather than people that approach mixes like, oh, every mix I use the Pultec and I do this, and that's what I'm going to do on every song. It's like, I cannot think like that, because it never works for me doing the same thing. It's also why I don't have templates. Yeah. It's also why I don't have templates. I'll have a routing. I'll have a template in the aspect of my final summing masters going to my print track. I have a hybrid setup with a summing mixer. So we'll import that, and that's always the same. And on the master, I'll have the same plugins, and that changes every few months. But, and sometimes even on one mix, I'll swap one out and not use 3, and sometimes add 2, But that's about as far as I can go with templates. And then I have a vocal effects bank of like 10 different effects. And on certain mixes, I'll pull those in and I'll just experiment and see what's working that day. Other times I just start from scratch and be like, oh, okay, I already know I want this delay, this verb, this doubler, this Haas effect, this plugin, and I'll just pull them in one at a time and make them. But I can't use templates because everything I do every day is different. So one day I'll have live drums and live bass, and the next day I'll have 808s, and so it's templates are not for me. Like, they just don't work.
Yeah, no, I love that. That's great. When you were talking about the bass sometimes being a little bit later than the kick, I heard an interview with Sean Hurley, who's like a well-known session bass player in LA. He was saying he likes to play his note like just right after the kick to give it that extra like that place. I don't know if I agree with that on a groove level, but on like a sonics level, I totally get it.
Yeah, well, there's so much subtlety in that. It could be, I mean, for a player, that could end up being, 60, 80 milliseconds late. But from a technical aspect, it could be 10 milliseconds later from a mixer doing it. And the subtlety of that versus groove versus phase versus not flamming versus not causing problems, all that stuff. I just had a song that was not done to a click because of the nature of the song. And I actually went through first to get the timing. I did this at the same time, but not only to get the timing of the bass with the kick, but also putting it in that optimal spot of sounding the best, but not changing the feel they were going after,
Yeah. I mean, just think about how
so
long
sometimes
that probably took you so long.
Oh yeah. I mean, it, it was a whole album, and that was at least a half hour for each song,
Right.
and but sometimes those intricate edit things can go so much farther than EQ and compression and
Yeah.
just trying to fix it. And it also that's a perfect thing to give you an ear break. Like, I was mixing a song with live drums last week, and once I needed an ear break, and that's the time I saved for my ear break was editing the toms and cleaning those up, because there was a lot of them, and I had to go through and do all my thing I do to toms, and that gave me a nice ear break. I could listen low. For a while, I wasn't even listening, and I didn't need to play it. I could just do it by the waveform, and so sometimes those edit things give us a fresh perspective when we get back into mix mode. Sometimes they're a drag because you don't want to leave mix mode,
Right.
Mentally.
Yeah. The flow state or whatever.
Yeah, but man, they go so far. Having timing great and correct. I won't even say perfect. I'll just say correct.
Right.
It just makes the mix so much better,
Yeah.
And sound choice. That's the other huge one. Producers, I really respect producers that take the time to choose the perfect sound rather than just a sound. And I understand there's a creative element of just being in the vibe and grabbing stuff and having your flow. You can't mess that up, because then you're really going to overthink things and ruin it. But the guys that go back later and be like, is there a better kick sound than the one I just grabbed when I was in the moment? And taking that time, I really respect that, because it makes the mix better before we even start.
Right. Yeah. That makes so much sense. Yeah, I recently had a mix where it was like I just did a few like little time edits, and it just made such a big difference in the whole feel of the, like, just like you were talking about. And it's like I love that, like, these are the things that, like, we're not technically hired to do when you do a mix, right? But like
exactly.
it's editing, right? Like it's not mixing, but it's like,
well,
that's going to get it over the finish line, right? Like in the best possible way.
Absolutely.
It's the big picture mentality.
Totally. There's things that we do in that realm that if the artist or the producer knew we were doing them, they would be totally against it. And if you have that conversation with them, they'll stop you before you even show it to them. But that's why I believe in just as simply as making a new playlist, so you have the original to get back to in like 2 seconds. So
Smart.
You edit the bass, you get it better, and then you tell them about it after they've heard it. And if they hear it before you say something, then fine. It's like, oh, I did it at the base. I was going to tell you about that. I think it feels better. What do you think? And then we're like, I don't know. And then they get some of them get paranoid. Some of them are thankful. They're like, oh, that's awesome. Thank you so much for doing that. Other ones are like, you mess with the bass. And there's like, oh, you're an engineer. You shouldn't be doing that. And it's like, actually, I'm a musician too, but whatever. But yeah. And then it's like, okay, you just take the time where it's like, okay, here's what I did, and here's it original. And you expect them to agree with you, and sometimes they don't. Sometimes they're like, I like the messed up one better. They don't use those words, but they're like, I like the original better. And it's like, okay, well, I have a feeling you're just being attached because that's how you gave it to me, and your pride or whatever.
Everything is demoitis, right?
Yeah, or maybe they really do hear it as better, and it's like, okay, well, I respect that. I just wanted to show you, so we'll go back to the old one, flip the playlist. There it is, So I try not to ever disrespect people. Like in my early days, sometimes I would just hit play on a song for a client, and the drums would be not new rhythms, but new sounds. Be like, oh, there's a snare layered and there's a kick completely replaced. And I quickly learned it's like, oh, well, you can't just completely disrespect people like that,
Yeah.
So sometimes you have to have that conversation where it's like, oh, hey man, I think this kick could be better with this other raw sound. Do you mind if I try? And you give them that respect. You have the conversation, or like I said with the playlist, you just have it ready to go. But like, hey, when they walk in, like, hey, I changed your kick, but I also engineered the original to its fullest. So if you hate the new one, I can 2 seconds switch back to the old one, and then you give it to them like that, and then they appreciate that you're respecting their production and their artistry, and sometimes you win, and it's like, okay, great, we get to go with my kick. They do see it as better, just like me. I'm not crazy, So,
wow, that's amazing. I'm curious in terms of like your low end mixing. How reliant are you on on side chaining the bass to the kick? Do you try? Are you not into it at all the time? Sometimes
Uh,
depends.
Probably
What's
8 out of 10 times. Used to be 10 out of 10, and now I've recognized that there's some situations where the bass masking the kick during the attack moment actually works and feels different. Um, so in the last probably 2 years, I have decided that instead of checking it for um, if it's working and feeling good from a low end perspective, listen to how that feels as well with the side chaining. And I have three different things I do that with. One is our compressor, which I've used for years, and then the other two are one is Kickstart 2.
oh
Um, that's a great plugin for that. And then the third one is Track Spacer by Waves Factory,
yeah
and all three do different and feel different ways. And yeah, so I always think about doing that. That's definitely one of my regular things. But then sometimes, like I said before, I'm an A/B guy,
yeah
so I'm gonna check it and bypass and be like, yeah, it was better before this day, and not use it. And then other times I do, but I always send pre-fader from the kick. And one thing I just learned from a client, which is it's still odd in my head, but it's cool and it does a thing, and that is side chaining the hi-hat by the kick. So when the hi-hat and kick play together, the hi-hat dips. And that
huh
was an interesting one, and it does a thing that's kind of cool sometimes. So that's one of my new, literally like within the last
huh
3 weeks, one of my new things that I experiment with. So I also do vocal to instrument bus side chain occasionally. If I have a
mm.
track where they don't want the vocal loud, but the instrumentation is very thick and dense, I will use something like Track Spacer and frequency dependent wise
yeah
use send the lead vocal to the music bus, and then the drums and the bass bus are they're left alone. But to be just tapping on guitars and keyboards, getting them out of the way of that vocal, in certain moments. And I've even automated the send fader on that sometimes. Um,
huh
yeah, also sidechain vocal effects from the lead, probably only like 30% of the time, but sometimes I'll duck the reverb or the low end of the reverb by the vocal, and that way once the vocal stops singing, the low end of the verb will come up with the release. It'll kind of plume back up as it's decaying if it's a big like warm plate or something like that.
yeah
So yeah, I got quite a few side chain little tricks I do like that.
yeah I need to mess around more with that. I've been doing, like, when you're talking about masking, I was thinking specifically about cutting out the low end and reverbs, because I feel like that's also gets that in the way so much with like the low end all the time.
It does. That's why sometimes I just straight EQ them. I'll have, my hardware Burcasti or the UVI makes a a plugin that's just called Plate.
Mm.
And it's amazing sounding, but it can be very thick. So sometimes I'll just do a flat EQ. Other times I'll do a sidechain where it can let go of that low end when the instrument or vocal stops, and then you don't think I cut it. It's just being cut during the moment of performance, but during the ring out after the fact, it's thick.
Yeah,
So,
I interviewed a guy named Daniel Ford. I don't know if you know him, Dr. Ford, and
oh yeah, of course,
yeah, he
yeah,
was saying, is this like a sometimes problem or an always problem? And that's like how you decide, how you're going to deal with it, like on an engineer level. Are you going to use dynamic EQ or just like regular EQ? Like what's happening here? I thought that was like a really
yeah,
cool way of thinking about it. Is this
absolutely.
all the time or sometimes? Yeah, amazing. In terms of vocal tone, I don't know, I found a video of you explaining like fast releases and stuff. Like, I don't know, talk to me a little bit about your thought process when it comes to like getting a vocal to really push out of the mix
Yeah,
and also sound shiny and
okay.
all the amazing things that you do to vocals.
9 out of 10 times I like fast release on vocals, and it causes problems, but I don't mind fixing those problems because of the result. And I spend a good amount of time. I probably spend half hour to an hour every mix dealing with the vocals dynamics of a lead vocal.
Mm-hmm.
And I mess with the tails of the words finishing and the S's and the breaths and all that stuff. And my compression will cause the reason for why I have to pay attention to those elements more. The tail of the words, the S's and the breaths.
Mm-hmm.
Because I like to compress vocals a lot, and I will do heavy compression with one compressor and then sometimes with multiple compressors. So a little bit on each compressor building up. But I feel like the lead vocals are the king. That's why you're buying the song. You know, most times, more than 9 out of 10 times, the lead vocal is what you're selling. You know, and I'm not saying like sell out or overly commercial. I'm just saying that's who the artist is. If it's not instrumental, it's about the lead vocal. Like that's
the vocal is
about.
The vocal is the king or the queen. That's for sure.
Exactly. So it has to sound like $1 million unless it's not supposed to. If it's supposed to sound lo-fi or something, that's another story. But most of the time I want it to sound like $1 million, and sometimes I'd say more often than not, it doesn't. You know, it's like unless they own a high-end mic with a good chain and they had an engineer record it rather than do it themselves in their apartment, you know, it probably doesn't sound really expensive, but that's always what I want. So over the years, I've developed techniques that just get me there. And again, just like the low end, it's not a same all one size fits all type thing. It's a thing you got to do by ear. You got to feel. And if people ask me what my vocal chain is, I can tell you the things I like, but I can't tell you my chain. I can't tell you. I could take the same plugins and the next day they'll be in a different order. It's just I'm a very reactionary type thing based on the based on the sonics. So the way the S's hit from a certain singer, the de-esser might need to be earlier in the chain that day, you know. Right. So and this is stuff that just comes with experience. And if you're one of these people that always does the same thing every time, so I'm gonna do an RVox, an R-de-esser, Pro Q2, and then a soothe, and that's my chain every time, all the time. And you force that on every vocal, or you at least start with that on every vocal. I feel like that's going to bind you up into having some mixes be great with vocals and some be just okay. Obviously, if you're halfway decent, you're going to achieve professional results and something that's acceptable. But there could be more out there for getting a great vocal. So I'm very fluid. So might have a mix where I might do a hybrid where I go with my locomotive tube compressor, the 14B, and then go into a Pultec and then go back in the box, and I'll have that going, and then I'll maybe put the old Waves gray de-esser, and then go into a Pro Q. And a lot of times with sounds, I'm not one of these guys that always rolls out the low end on everything but kick and bass. I'll check it first. So a lot of these EQ plugins have spectrographs now, and I'll look and be like, oh, okay, that needs to be rolled off technically, you know, and I'll listen and I'll be like, how high do I want to put this filter? And do I need to filter the air? Is it too airy at like 18K? Do I need to filter at 16, you know? And then I might need another de-esser after that. You know, I might need to do the Melodyne trick where I pull the S's, the sibilants down with Melodyne, or I might need to go in and clip gain them all. Or another technique, I have Audio Suite presets for really sharp dips. And I'll look at a spectrum analyzer and find out, okay, these S's are really peaking at 2.5K and 8K. And I'll match the preset to that, and I'll go through the S's in Audio Suite, the EQ, and I might do a little bit of gain on the EQ to also lower them. So negative 4 dB on the output, 2K dip, 8K dip, and I'll go through and I'll click every S and Audio Suite it. So I've EQ'd the S instead of EQing the actual vocal,
smart.
and I've also leveled the S, and then the S's sound better before I work on them with plugins in the chain. Sometimes I just have 3 de-essers of different models, and I have this thing in my head where it's like, okay, the Massey de-esser works on the higher S's, and it has a mix knob, which I like, so I can kind of overdo it and then mix it back. And then,
Right.
the Waves at de-esser works better on 2K S's and 3K S's, So it's really all about listening to that vocal and then, okay, well, I know this works, and even though it works, I don't like it, so get rid of that. And I just go through and I use different plugins, so that's never the same every day. And sometimes if I'm doing multiple songs for an artist, the chain can be the same because they sound the same on every song. Other times the key changes so much they're in a different range, and I gotta get rid of a plugin and approach it differently. And then other times I approach it differently just because I'm going for a different thing, But I do like the fast release because it puts it in your face, and that's just something that's just part of my sound and what I like. And sometimes it's a mixture of a fast release compressor and then at the end a medium release compressor, and that holds it back a little bit. Sometimes I'll have a SSL waves on the bus of all my vocals, and that'll kind of glue them together, just doing like a dB or 2 of that, at the end, So yeah, it's with everything I do, it's just kind of a fluid approach and finding it,
Yes, I love like it's so source dependent, and you're so like meticulous with like the details. Like everything is like, and then you're ABing, right, and then you're checking, and you're just making sure it's like you're
the
super
vocal
honed in.
as you know, the vocal is the most complex thing on the planet frequency wise. The next thing is probably harp or grand piano, but harmonically and tonally, every singer's different. Every key of the song can change it, but you have you can have 2 different rappers that are different, 2 different singers. BTS has always been a challenge because there's 7 members, and each one of their lead vocals has to sound like $1 million. So I have to do that process with all 7 of them.
Wow, that's so challenging.
Yeah, and then once you get them to all sound good, not only are you doing that, you have to make them all match. So when you hear the song down, it doesn't sound wild. Like, wow, that sounds great, but it sounds so out of pocket with this next guy singing, and that's weird transitionally. So you got to find that balance with 7 guys. But here's the thing. They all probably record on the same mic, so that makes it harder. They're not all using the most optimal mic for them. And a lot of people don't do that anyways because, people go with the mics that they've heard are great or what they can afford.
Right.
And if they're recording with a producer, they're only using 1 mic, like very few producers have a closet of mics at their home studio, and then a lot of guys, even if they book a big studio, they're like, oh, do you have a C800 or, oh, do you have a 251? And they just go with that because they've heard that's great. And it is great, but is it great for them?
Right.
And I'm guilty of that too. It's like when people come here, I always choose this mic because it, if I'm recording them for a lead vocal, I love this mic. So I'm at least going to start with it. If it's totally wrong for them and we have the time, I might dip in the closet and grab something else. But
it's a hard balance because you want to keep them inspired.
Yeah.
You don't want to like audition 1 million mics on the same singer.
Exactly. Sometimes you cannot take that time, but
yeah, I have the Slate mic. I have the Slate modeling mic, which is helpful for that kind of stuff.
That's cool because you can try a bunch of different ones after the fact. So that's kind of really cool. But I think it would be great if singers took it upon themselves and rappers, and some of them do, to discover over time, like, what's the best mic for me? Like Usher, I used to hear his engineer would carry around a Bronner mic. Or is it Brower? No, it's Bronner. It's a real high-end mic and got a road case for it. And everywhere Usher records, that's the mic. And that's what he discovered. I'm sure he's tried C800s and U47s and stuff, but that's what he likes on his voice. So he's got that consistency, and I really respect that, because it's like, wow, we're starting out before I do any mixing. We're starting out with the best case scenario. So, and he's got a guy to watch his back. Like, is the tube functioning properly? Is there buzzing? So I think that's great. And I think that's something all artists should strive for, not just jump in the booth on whatever mic that was put up for them. And I know, expense comes into it, and you can't always do that, but I think that's something people should strive for.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. If I had more money, I'd go for like a 251 probably, because that seems to be like 8 out of 10 vocalists. That seems to be the right
Yeah,
sound.
yeah.
That for my ears,
There's-
what I tend to like. But yeah,
Mhm.
but it's always worth experimenting and seeing what works best if you have the time and it's not
Yeah.
gonna annoy the artist. I wanted to ask you a little bit. That's a really interesting point. The BTS making the 7 singers sound like one. I don't know. Walk me through like an example of that if you don't mind.
I almost knocked over my iPad.
Oops.
That is, it's really just by ear. Like once I get technical, a lot of times with every sound, whether it's vocal or not, I'll listen to the sound and be like, okay, technically this needs to be taken care of before I get to the mixing, artistically. So it's like, okay, this vocal is very boomy, a lot of proximity effect. I need to address this, and I'll go for that first. So once that part is done, any technical stuff like this is really shrill, whatever, then it's just about jumping back and forth. So it's like just like you would check your chorus versus your verse for different aspects, whether it's level or whatever. Then I'll jump between the different singers. So it's like, okay, I really like this guy's sound that I got, and he's finished. He's kind of like the benchmark. Can I make all the other 6 guys sound like this singer? Because I really like how he sounds. Probably fit that one microphone the best, and whatever, like the EQ I got, the de-essing, everything's great. So I'll start by copying all those plugins to everybody, and then I'll just go by changing them. So I'll copy them over, I'll bypass them all. Now I got the singer I like the sound of, and the next singer I'll start unbypassing, see if they fit him, adjust what I think needs to be different, and I'm just going back and forth between singer 1 and singer 2 until they kind of match, and then I'll get them probably 90%, and start getting the other guys. And once I got all the guys there, like all 7 guys, and they're mostly matching, then I'll fine tune it as I do fader rides as well, because that might change something. And once I get the breaths and the S's and the dynamics and everything taken care of, and the levels, and I'll check the rough mix, and where did they have this ad lib? I mean, get that in pocket, and the panning how I think they want it and how I like it, and I'll just keep bouncing back and forth. Like, okay, here's singer number 4 versus singer 1, 1, 4, 4, 1, back and forth until I feel like they match, and then, check it again later. And yeah, so that's kind of my technique, just kind of jumping around. And
yeah, it's like an individual channel thing. It's not like you're grouping them and then doing some similar grouping to kind of put them in the same world.
Definitely not. Yeah. And then, there are so many vocals on those songs. Actually, I mean, most of the K-pop artists I work with, there's just a lot of vocals. Sometimes, 150. So I will get the leads, and then the great thing about BTS is they're so organized with their files. Everything's labeled.
That's exactly what Ken Lewis said.
Yeah, and so I'll take all of there's a rapper in their group named Sugar. So I'll take Sugar, and I'll get all his tracks, and I'll copy all those plugins from that lead, that first one, onto every one of his tracks. So now I'm treating all his backgrounds and ad libs and all that stuff just like his lead, as a good starting point. And then once I get all that done, then I'll check and see if that was right. And be like, oh, okay, well, this one doesn't need the de-esser because it's somebody singing oohs and ahs and there's no S's. So get rid of the de-essers. We don't need those, And then this one needs a little bit, more mid-range. Maybe they did something different that day and on when they did this overdub, So yeah, it's just kind of the process. You start with one guy, get him sounding great, and then match everybody else. And all while you're trying to make sure that it's good for the song.
That's right. That's the thing about this. What we do is like, I don't know. I think this is what I figured out is like what makes audio engineering so difficult is like you can make something technically right and better, but then you still have to ask that question: does it fit the song better? Because there's always that artistic like extra thing, and that the combination of like the technical and the artistic decision makes what we do difficult, I think.
And sometimes you can go the wrong direction, and what you thought was good for the song, they don't like. So
right,
you could have, you could have this warmth and body, and all their vocals be like, oh, this is a ballad, it needs this, and the vocal needs to have that Michael Bublé proximity and beefiness to it, and I love it, and it's right on top. And they're like, yeah, we kind of want to thin out all the vocals and push them back a little bit. Oh, dang, and it's K-pop. I have a lot of work changing this now, So
right. Wow.
yeah, sometimes, yeah, I mean, opinions. This whole industry is opinions, every aspect of it almost. It's like, oh, well, they don't like this, they want this, and so I think that's why it's such a such a awesome thing when you nail it on mix one and they just like what you like,
Yeah.
And I have this one client that refuses to give me rough mixes, and they're like, we don't want you to have any pre-deposition of what we're going for. We just want to hear what you want. And then I give it to them, and there's a little bit of tweaks, and we're done. And I love it. But most people are not like that. But
yeah,
it's
are you?
fun,
Do you reference the rough while you're mixing?
Yeah, I like to, because that so many people get demoitis, and I want to be sure I'm beating what they last were listening to and adding some value. Otherwise, why did they hire me? So it's helpful to listen to the rough. That way, I'm not giving the song back quieter if possible, if I can get the same overall level, and then where they liked their vocals and their effects. A lot of people these days are very particular on their vocal effects. So it's like, oh, I hate eighth note delays and a doubler on my vocal. I don't like that, so it's like good to know that and hear what they liked, hear what the producer liked, and like, oh, my snare is way louder than the producer had it. Let me turn that down. I don't think he meant to ever have it that loud. So it's a good check, and it saves time, because you could do everything different. And we all know there's a million ways to mix a song, and you could really go down the wrong path to where you have a lot of work to do to fix it, So actually, yeah, I really rely on the rough. I have a system here. I have a Heritage Audio. It's called a Ram 5000. That's actually it right here. And the cool thing is it's Bluetooth, so you can disconnect it. See, yeah.
Wow.
So what I'll do is I'll put this is my final mix. This is Pro Tools out 1 and 2. I'll have the rough mix here, and I'll have a reference mix here, which is just something else professional that I like the sound of. Maybe a few things, and like if it's like, oh, well, I'm mixing the song, but I really like the low end of this Harry Styles song, and I really want to kind of go for that, so I'll put that on this button. I'll put the rough mix here, and all day long I'm just like this, and then
that's
jumping
amazing.
down to there, and it's like, how's my brightness compared to other professional stuff? Jump down there, and then how's my lead vocal level compared to where they had it? It's like, oh, well, I think their lead vocal was too low. In my opinion, I'm gonna have it louder, and so that's what I do all day long when I mix.
I thought metric AB was cool. Like that's a whole next level. Yeah.
Well, it's something I don't have to move my mouse to change.
Yeah. It's
I can
click away.
You just use my left hand, and it's very fluid and fast. Metric AB is good, but I just import the wave. Sometimes I'll use Audio Hijack and rip it off Tidal, so I get the full quality. And I'll put them in my song. And sometimes with a reference, it's just maybe it's just the chorus I want to reference. Maybe it's like, oh, well, I know this artist really likes this reverb on this Her song, or I really like the low end on this song, or maybe they gave me a whole reference like, oh, we really love this Kendrick Lamar, blah, 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 go for that. And I'll put it in there. But sometimes I'll just chop out the chorus and loop the chorus through the whole 3 minutes of the song I'm mixing. And that way the chorus is always there no matter what part of the song on my song I'm at. And then with the rough mix, I'll just line it up so it's in time with the multi-track I'm mixing, and just makes it really easy for all my checks and balances, Yesterday I had a song where their rough mix was screaming loud, definitely distorted and crunchy, and I had a conversation with the artist like, hey, I'm going to give you your mix back lower in level because I don't want it to be so crunchy and distorted. And he was like, yeah, we don't want that. I gave it to him, and he's like, oh, well, I kind of missed that crunchiness. Now it had a glue to it. I was like, okay, well, let me go down that road of trying to find my own way of doing it rather than just not having a limiter and clipping the heck out of everything. So I went down that road, but having their rough mix on that button, so I can be like, okay, am I getting to their extreme loudness, and do I have clipping sounding like it has that glue factor and a little bit of crunch, but not as much as they had, and so it's really handy to just have that A/B, of the original rough mix,
Right at your fingertips. Speaking of fingertips,
exactly.
I think I saw something you posted about using SoundFlow, or you're getting like, have you entered that whole world?
It's awesome. I have it's somewhat on pause because it works best with the latest version of Pro Tools. And I'm on an older version. I'm on I'm on Pro Tools Ultimate 2020.5, and they're on the newer one now. And once I upgrade, I will be using SoundFlow full time. Right now, I use it here and there, but it does something weird to the plugin menus when on this version that I don't really care for. So I have it. I'm subscribed. I use it occasionally. I have a plugin loader deck, so you can load plugins really quick. And then I have an edit deck, and it switches automatically depending on what screen I'm looking at.
Oh, cool.
So if I flip over to the mix window, it pulls up the plugin loader, But it's great. SoundFlow is awesome. I don't upgrade my Pro Tools as quick as the release of the version comes out, just because I could lose, 2-3 days trying to fix a problem if like there's a glitch or it doesn't work with my processor. So I have a Hackintosh computer, which is a PC that thinks it's a Mac. It runs Mac OS. And so I upgrade kind of a couple years behind the latest versions. So while everybody's complaining like, oh, it doesn't work with this plugin and it doesn't work with it crashes my Pro Tools, I'm waiting for all that to be fixed. And I'm always on the most stable, harmonious version. And I have, every time I do a install of a plugin, I use it for a few days, make sure there's no conflicts with that plugin in my system. And then I do a backup of my internal hard drive so that at any time I can put that back and it's a working perfect scenario. So I don't run into the software issues that a lot of other people do because I'm always using the most stable versions of everything.
That's smart. Which OS are you on? Just out of curiosity.
I'm on Catalina now.
Right.
So with my Hackintosh, the guy that builds them, he's always in the know of what models of his computers he builds and what OSs and what version of Pro Tools are the most harmonious. And I'll call him one day and be like, hey, can I upgrade yet? And he'll be like, well, the RAM you have doesn't really isn't copacetic with this version of this and this motherboard and blah, blah, blah. So he'll be like, maybe wait a little bit. And I'll just go on about my business and everything's working perfectly. I'm not so far outdated. I'm not in Pro Tools 10 or anything like that. So I might be missing out on like one aspect of something new, but everything else is amazing and nobody knows the difference. Like the mix is still the mix, But I'm just slow to upgrade. So just out of caution and making sure my workflow is never interrupted,
Yeah, I totally feel that. I haven't upgraded in a while because my computer's just getting old. Like I'm on a 2015 iMac. So I'm just like, why would I go past Mojave? It just seems too dangerous.
Yeah.
So I at some point I'm gonna have to get a new computer, and then we'll update, and then everything will be okay. But also I'm nervous about my Waves plugins and like having to whoop everything, and so I'm kind of waiting for that moment.
Yeah, every new computer is always like a few day turnaround and a big ordeal, and so
nobody talks about these things, but things that we have to deal with, right?
Right. The worst one was for me was in 2007. I was mixing a whole album that I also recorded, so I was also involved in all the editing, and we melodined the whole album over time. Also melodined some instruments, stuff like that. And I upgraded Melodyne and lost everything bit of Melodyning I did.
Oh,
and none of them were committed. A few of them were committed, but most were not. And I had to literally Melodyne the whole album over again. And
that was
hard.
The worst. So that sounds terrible.
Now Yeah.
Lesson
So
learned.
now I'm very cautious, and yeah,
Yeah,
so
no,
I like to be cautious.
yeah, no. It's like it just takes one like really serious like fuck up where you have to do a lot of work twice to just kind of
Yeah.
like teach you one of these like lessons of just like just hold your horses there for a
Totally.
second, you know?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, amazing. Let me think where I want to go from here. Um, are you comfortable talking about like co-mastering with Shachar and how that's going? I don't know if that's still happening or
Yeah. Yeah. We haven't done any in a while. Um, but yeah, I mean that's always been great. I asked him the other day if he's still, if his heart is still in it, and he doesn't want to be known. I don't think he wants to be known for being a mastering engineer. But I gotta say, just having mastering for your mix in house in the same room on the same rig where he can be mastering himself and he can be like, you know what, I want to do this to the master, but it's affecting the vocal. Let me open Bob's mix and change that real quick, rebounce a new one, and then master it, or the kick or something like that. It's so valuable, and then he can show me when I come in, and I can hear it right on the same speakers I'm used to. So it's great, and then vice versa. If I like his mastering 90%, I'm like, you know what? I feel like it's a little limited, a little too much. Let me open his mastering and change that one thing and rebounce it. And it's like, I like this better. And then he'll be like, okay, cool, go with that. And
wow.
that flexibility, instead of having someone off site or
Right.
another state or halfway around the world,
Totally.
it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool. But yeah, I mean, I have so many mastering guys. I have a handful for different genres, different sounds I hear in my head, different budgets, like the guy that introduced us, Nicholas DiLorenzo, he's one of my favorites. Um,
Nice.
and I send him a lot of work, because it always comes back just perfect, and I think I collect mastering friends based on how my mixes sound with them. And that's probably a natural thing that everyone does. But, if they hear similar to how I hear, it's always
Right.
going to sound good, but a little bit better than what I did. So got him. I really love Randy Merrill at Sterling, Gene Grimaldi at Oasis. And they all just do different things. So like if I get to choose the mastering engineer, or if somebody asks me for a recommendation, I'll be like, oh, well, for your song, your music, I feel like Gene Grimaldi would be best. And let me introduce you to him on email. And then they'll hire him, and sometimes it's a budget thing. It's like, oh, you need a guy that works well with indie prices. Okay, how about this guy? And,
Yeah.
so I use different guys all the time. And sometimes I don't get to choose. Sometimes BTS is going to use who they already decided, and
Yeah.
labels have deals with mastering guys for whole albums, or maybe they just have a guy that they always use because he always does what they want, and
Yeah. I mean, it's similar to what you were saying. Like you're friends with artists and producers, and they choose to hire you, and so you can kind of, pass the buck on to your friends when it makes
Yep.
sense.
Yep. And then sometimes they choose the wrong guy. In my opinion, it's like that guy always over compresses my stuff, or that guy, he's a rock guy and he's not used to my heavy low end. It's not going to go well. And then they use him, and then like, oh yeah, we should have used a different guy. So,
Yeah.
sometimes that happens.
I'm gonna learn from your mistakes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, man, this has been so good. I've learned so much just talking with you. I want to get into the sauce segment so people can kind of hear what we're talking about, although I'm sure people have heard so many of your mixes.
Okay.
So you sent me a track called Way Out by Peyton. So let's have a listen to that for about 90 seconds and we'll chat about it.
Okay.
Sound cool?
All right, cool.
So I do this
Sure.
I do this in real time. I'm going to just like listen and ask you about the mix. Yeah, Bob, it sounds so good.
Thank you.
I like the combination of, just like the 808 and the really modern kick drum with like that kind of like real vintage kind of bass guitar underneath it.
Yeah.
I thought that was the coolest part about the mix, and the keys sound really nice and like envelop you, and obviously the vocals like
Nice.
way out out front.
Yeah. That's a young producer named Donald Phillip, and the artist is Peyton Moormeyer. He's up and coming. The guy's like starting to take off, but he's just got really cool music. Like it's got these urban vibes and the drums, but then these pop vibes, and his vocals are cool. That song he's pretty softly singing. It's like
Yeah.
pretty intimate kind of singing. So that was definitely a challenge. I just did a tutorial video on this whole song for Warren Hewart Pro Mix Academy, and I go through the whole thing plugin by plugin. And they actually have a 18-minute YouTube excerpt if anyone wants to find that. It just came out yesterday. But yeah, that song was a lot of fun to work with. And Donald's a great producer. He's definitely one of these up and coming guys that everyone's going to be hearing about, you know.
Amazing. Do you remember anything technical that you did specifically for like maybe like one or two interesting tidbits for the audience? Like maybe how you merged the low end of the bass with the kick. Like what was that? What happened in the song specifically?
I don't remember what I did on the kick. I remember the 808 specifically. There's a few different things. There's the live bass, there's 808s, and then there's the kick. The live bass is more of a mid-range kind of P-bassy, plucky type sound. So I'm sure I just kind of curtailed the low end on that and didn't worry about it being hefty. And then the 808 isn't very loud, so the kick has a lot of room. The 808 definitely adds a vibe, and it has this parallel situation where there's the 808 itself, which is very tight. I think I have about 6 plugins on it. Like that thing is very just held in place. And it's a little bit lower level, but then on the hook, it's joined by a duplicate of itself that's really distorted, and it really brought out some like interesting harmonics, and it has a stereo effect on it. So you hit the chorus and the 808 gets wide and grainy. You know, it's kind of a cool effect. But I remember doing that, and then I remember, the kick is just kind of upfront and punchy. I don't believe it's too bright. It's kind of like a darker kick, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
So yeah, just the melding between those three. The cool thing is that it wasn't a loud 808 with a loud kick with a loud pluck bass. It's like it was supposed to be kind of this layered dynamic. You know, one thing's low, one thing is more mid range, and one thing is up front. So it wasn't very challenging compared to some other low end situations I've had to deal with. But
I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And
but it was cool. It was a nice
vocals,
it was a nice blend. I really I could like, you know, you can hear all those individual elements so nicely in the mix, you know.
Yeah, there's a lot too. The one thing I like about Donald's productions is that there's a lot of tracks, so it's very much like the K-pop songs I mix, where there's a lot of stuff to deal with. But he does it arrangement wise so well, where you don't have 150 tracks playing all at once for the whole 3 minutes of the song. It's like he's got a lot of vocal effects. He calls them sauce, ironically. But he's got these sauce tracks, which are audio tracks that have been printed from like delay throws and stuff, and then he processes them after that. So he's got this bank of sauce tracks, and they all have different. Sorry, I hit the mic. They all have different plugins on them to manipulate them, filter them, radio them, whatever he's doing. And when I get his sessions, I just freeze those all, and I don't think about them. I send them to a group, and then I overall EQ them tonally just to make them fit my sound. But all that work he did, I don't want to reinvent the wheel, so I just freeze them, and I don't think about them. They're already heavily affected. Sorry. And yeah, and then the other thing about that song was the lead vocal, because he's singing so soft. It was kind of a challenge dynamically. So I really had to work on some parallel stuff, some compression, keeping it sounding intimate, but making sure you don't lose any words over the drums and other stuff.
Yeah.
There's a very interesting parallel, which I don't do very often. But the parallel has a lot of stereo modulation and fuzziness to it. If you listen to the parallel itself, you wouldn't want to use it as a vocal, where most of the time my parallels are just another dry vocal that's just heavily compressed, and I mix it in with the more natural sounding vocal. But this one is stereo and definitely fuzzy, and it's mixed really low, but in that Warren Hewart tutorial, you can hear it. It's a very interesting parallel, and not something that you would normally think to mix into a vocal, but it works really well in that
Kind of
song.
gives it like extra girth, kind of like that extra like mid range,
Yeah,
oomph.
and just the harmonic. So here's the thing about saturation that one of the things that everyone loves is that saturation will call your ear's attention to the sound more. So having a parallel vocal that's distorted, not heavily, but it just kind of tickles your ear more, and you can have the fader lower, but it does a job of just making something heard easier. As well as it's a loudness thing. I mean, it's basically compression and limiting saturation. And
Right.
that mixed with the Haas effect is a great thing to do for vocals like that, where they're just kind of difficult to hear because they're soft spoken, and you can't. You have this fight of like, I want the fader loud, I want the vocal louder, but when you push the fader up, then it's like, but now it's too loud, and then now it's too soft, and you go back and forth. So on that song, the saturation and the parallel compression, all that stuff was very paramount in its importance of making that vocal successful, especially like when you listen to that song on a phone.
Yeah.
You can hear what he's singing, but it's like it's on this fence of like almost being too like hard to hear, but you can hear it. So that was definitely a challenge.
It's so interesting. I would
and
never
then-
have thought, like, I mean, I'll have to listen back again knowing that, but like, that's not what I would have assumed you would have done on that voice at all.
Yeah, that one was one of those situations where it's like, okay, I'm finding myself not doing my typical thing, and but having that experience of that, that flow where you're mentally not against trying something new, and in a split second, so it's like, oh, this isn't working, go into this and try this, and then okay, that is working, a little bit of that, and so that's kind of like my whole philosophy of mixing is just being able to adapt and do something new,
Yeah. Can I ask you how long it takes you to do a mix, like typically?
Yeah, it's on a small track session, something like a trap or just a minimal track session where it's probably like 30 to 40 tracks, could be 3 to 4 hours, with the headphone checks. Like I have this, I use this, just a quick deviation, I use this plugin called Sonobus, and it has a phone app, and it's free. Everyone should get it, but you can broadcast to your phone and then put in the AirPods and check your mix on AirPods, which millions of people own. So not a bad idea.
Definitely a great idea.
With that process of checking it on the AirPods and then taking some ear breaks, I would say a small session, probably 3 to 4 hours, a big medium session, probably 8, and then some of these huge track sessions like K-pop. I either do, if I have to get it done in one day, it could be 12 to 15 hours. Like all the BTS sessions, I usually do a 2-day thing where I do a full day and a half day the next day. And I like that because there's so many moving parts to those songs. And it's like you can get deep into the vocals with these 150 tracks of vocals, and then realizing the next day is like, you know what, I got to go back to the production now that I got all these vocal parts leveled and automated and EQ'd. Now the percussion needs to be a little different, So I like having a lot of time for those because there are so many tracks, and if I try to really force it in one day, then I'll miss stuff and hear it later and then regret it,
Right.
So I like to try to get a song where the client's not going to have many changes if possible. Or if they do, it's just musical opinion. I don't want them to be like, oh, it's too boomy or it's too bright. I want all that stuff taken care of. And then if musically it's like, you know what, we kind of want a darker vibe on this. Can you kind of curtail the high end, not so clear, then that's fine. It's just a musical opinion. But I try to get the song as professionally, if you want to call it radio ready or streaming ready or whatever, as possible before I can give it to them. That way it almost sounds like it's mastered, so, almost.
Yeah. You're giving them the biggest chance of approving it, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love I just like, I keep taking away, from this, like your attention to detail and how, fluid you are, and everything gets, you pay attention to all the tracks, like,
Yeah.
everything is noticed and taken care of, which is great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's an approach. Sometimes I wish I was less like that, just because I could go home earlier if I just kind of jam this all in and smash the two bus. And there's guys that do that great, but yeah, I'm a control freak, I guess. So sometimes I probably go too far, but yeah,
Hey, it's working for you.
it's
So don't change your
it's
approach. I could that's my opinion.
yeah, it's fun. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Just I wanted to ask you, a guy. I don't know if this is something on your radar or what you think about it, but I guess I'm just curious because you're deep in the industry. Like, what's happening with Atmos and you specifically, or in general? Is it something that's on your radar, thinking about, not caring about yet, or what are what are your
So
thoughts?
I've only had one indie client ask for it at all. Um, and it's definitely not an everyday conversation in my life, so I haven't invested in doing it in my own room. I did do 2 or 3 Atmos mixes to learn it. I did some in AirPods with the Bluetooth transmitter. I did do one in headphones, and then with my partner at the studio, Eric, I did a thing for Lupe Fiasco where I mixed the stereo and then made stems for Eric to mix the Atmos, and then kind of oversaw him doing the Atmos more from a production standpoint. But that was fun. But yeah, it's now if someone asks me for Atmos, I just refer them to somebody. So um, there's a few people out there that like if I do the stereo and they want Atmos, like, oh, use this guy, he's great. And I'll just make them stems and they can do it. In my next facility, I will definitely wire it for Atmos, and then might start getting into it, buying the speakers and all that stuff. So
We'll see.
we'll
But
see. Yeah,
yeah, but it's not,
um,
it's interesting that like nobody's asking for it. So
yeah. I mean, it at the same time, it seems like it's here to stay. But there's guys that are doing all the back catalog for the labels. So like every day they're doing a full album or half an album or something. And there's those guys, and there's guys that are doing the new stuff, and they're doing it every day. So there's already plenty of people doing it. So not many people are just flat out asking me if I do it, but if I put the word out that I had an Atmos setup and discrete speakers and not doing it in headphones, and started kind of advertising myself like, hey, I do Atmos, like let's do some Atmos, then I would start getting that work. But I have enough stereo work, and I know some guys are doing both, so it's like they do the stereo and then they go right into doing the Atmos, and I think that's kind of cool too. So I eventually might get there. I'm in a transition with this studio and doing a new facility, and so as I get that underway, I will make that decision and probably go for it. But yeah, it seems like it's a format that's here to stay, just because the end consumer can receive it without any trouble, like literally in their AirPods, and some people have the new kind of sound bars that project the Atmos into the room and from just a couple devices. And back in the days where everyone thought 5.1 was going to be a music thing that was regular, you got some kid in an apartment and he's got one rear speaker on a milk crate, and the other one the cat bit through the wire, and then the other one is out of phase, and they give up on it, and that never became a format to enjoy music for the majority of people. But Atmos, because the end user can listen to it and accept it, even all they got to do is choose a new playlist or use the Atmos version on their streaming device, and they're hearing it. So because of that, no matter what your opinion is of the binaural encoding and how good it or bad it is, it's probably here to stay, because the label's investing so much into it, Apple's investing so much into it, and it's easily accessible,
right. But it sounds like it's not like a short term, like it's not going to put you out of work short term, with the stereo stuff. Amazing.
No, I mean, I don't think everyone's going to go all Atmos. I think stereo will stay. There's just too much, I don't know if you want to call it infrastructure, or too much happening that is stereo and that people consume stuff stereo. Even listening on your iPad or your phone is still stereo.
Yeah.
Some phones are still mono. So that stuff can't go away anytime in the next few years.
Yeah.
It's still going to exist.
Yeah, just like
And
the cost of building an Atmos room and what that does for like how that cost would be, passed forward to indie artists makes it like I
yeah,
think a lot less accessible for indie musicians.
right. Well, and now like 3-4 years ago, the cost of doing Atmos was a lot higher, and everyone made a lot more money as engineers doing it. And now that has lowered. So I don't know if indie people ever even realize that it's actually a little bit more accessible, and most of the guys
Mm.
are doing Atmos mixes cheaper than a stereo mix.
Huh.
So it actually is more accessible, but because of the distribution routes, I know like I don't know which ones. I don't know if it's DistroKid or CD Baby or a couple of them do Atmos distribution, but most of them still don't. So there's that aspect for indies is how you get it out there to the world.
Right.
Um,
Interesting.
so once that is an every platform type thing, and people get the word that Atmos isn't as expensive as it was
Mm.
3 years ago, I think indies might get into it. And then there's the whole producing for Atmos rather than mixing
Right.
only for Atmos. Right now, we take a stereo song, we make stems, give them to the Atmos guy, and mix it in Atmos. But now that you have Logic that has Atmos built in, and that will probably become a regular thing, it'll probably get integrated into Pro Tools better and smoother over the years and other programs. So I think there could be I don't know, but there could be this surplus of producers starting to produce with Atmos in mind, where it's like, okay, we're going to record this background vocal part specifically because they're imagining we're going to have that panned here, and I want to record this shaker. It's going to be swirling around your head or whatever. More creative Atmos, which is on one hand dangerous for how it folds down to binaural, but it's definitely a lot of producers don't care. They just want to be creative and discover, and that's what music's all about. So there could be an influx of guys producing for Atmos. I don't know, but a little bit scary, a little bit exciting, but we'll see.
Yeah. Wild. We'll see.
That whole thing is it's gonna depend on if the producer is making a track specifically for Atmos, making it fold down to stereo, but then also if they're hiring a mixer other than themselves mixing, getting him the files, to work on, because once you have objects panning and stuff like that, they have to kind of have the same system, same DAW or whatever. Otherwise, I don't know. I guess you can give them an ADM file and maybe they can open that and it'll all be there. But the transition between DAWs is going to have to be ultra smooth for that to become a reality. And right now, there's still a little bit of a learning curve with Atmos. So producers, not all of them want to go that deep into the technical aspect. But if that all becomes fluid, then guys will be producing for Atmos rather than it just being mixed for Atmos,
Right. And that sounds about a little bit more interesting, I think.
Yeah.
We'll see what happens. Wow, amazing. Well, Bob, this has been so fun. I really learned so much talking with you, and your mixes speak for themselves, and this has been great.
Oh, thanks, man.
I'd like to ask you a couple more general questions before we wrap up.
For sure.
If that's okay. I like to ask people about, we all have days where we're super pumped to get in the studio, and then there's days where we're a little bit less jazzed. Like, how do you stay psyched to get in work every day? Or do you have any habits or routines that you do that kind of keep you in that zone?
I don't think I have. The only habits I have to keep myself interested and working, every time is probably time based. Meaning, if I'm not feeling like mixing that day, sometimes you can't do it. It's like I'm doing a horrible mix today because I'm not into it, or occasionally it's like you think you're getting a great song because of your history with this person, and you get it and you're like, oh my God, I hate this. This isn't inspiring. I wish I didn't accept this or whatever. So some of those things you can't avoid, but sometimes just the time of like, you know what, if I just give myself an hour and do this other activity that could get me in it, going for a walk, just taking a drive, meeting up with somebody. And I've had it where I'll be mixing and I'm not feeling it, but somebody will stop by and they'll hang out for an hour. And then when they leave, it's like, now I feel like mixing, and that'll help, So sometimes it's time based, where it's like, I'm not feeling it now. Maybe in a few hours I will. Okay, I'm gonna end up staying here later. But if I start at 5 rather than 1 p.m., it's gonna end up a better mix. Sometimes it's a day thing. So the next day it's like, you know what, I got this mix technically accomplished. I got my delay throws, I got the balance, but it's just not, my heart wasn't in it. Now the next day I feel better about it. Now let me open it and make me love it. Let me work on it now.
Yeah.
So that's what I mean by time based. Sometimes it's just not the right time to do it. Just like, making a song. Sometimes if you're gonna like write a song, it's just not the day, and it's like not coming out well. And if you keep forcing it, it's just not going to come out good. So sometimes just having that time of just waiting and then doing it, works out better. I've waited whole days before, sometimes 2-3 days. Like someone will be like, "Oh, well, there's no rush on this." I'm like, you know what? Let me do this in 3 days, because my mind's on this other thing I really got to get done. And once I get that off my plate, I'll be in a better mental state, and I can really be artistic with your song and feel better about it. And, so
Yeah.
I have a very flowy, just like my mixing, my schedule is very like
In
flowy
flux.
when it can be. If there's not a deadline, like, oh, we got to have it by midnight, then I allow myself to be flexible, So
Yeah.
sometimes it's like, you know what? I don't feel like mixing. I have 5 songs. I have live drums. All the toms needed to be edited and the vocal needs to be tuned because they didn't have time to do that. Let me do that stuff because it's not artistic. I don't have to be in a mixy mood, a good mood. I can just knock this technical stuff out. I can get these songs ready, and then tomorrow I'll be in a better mood to just jump in and mix,
Yeah. It's funny. Those are the things I tend to procrastinate, right? The editing.
Yeah.
But it's a good attitude to get it over with, knock it out.
Yeah, if you're not feeling creative that day, then do the technical stuff, have that done. That way
Right.
your creative time will be even better because you have no technical stuff to deal with. So
Right.
it's all creative, So
Yeah. Yeah. I love that you're still doing like editing, like even though like, with all like, the Grammys and et cetera, like it's like, the things that people think are like so basic, but they're so important to the song. And like we talked about earlier of like taking the time to like nudge the bass to the kick, like all these things. They're small things, but they make a big difference. And I think it's so cool that you're doing that.
Yeah, it's part of mixing nowadays. I there's probably more. I mean, I think there's always more I could do if I really investigated, like, more time, especially timing. Timing is the most important thing on a production, on a,
Right.
having the files all at the correct timing. And sometimes it's hard to know where the best way of doing that is, sometimes you don't know that moving this file. I had Dave Pensato sitting on my couch back here one time. I played him a mix to get his opinion, and he was like, nudge the strings back 40 milliseconds. And I was like, what? Or forward. It was forward. I think it was a nudge them forward or something, because they had a really slow attack with the bow of the string.
Mhm.
And the timing was off, and it wasn't off musically. It was literally a technical, phase type thing. I don't know, but I nudged them, and the strings were just so much easier to hear, and the whole mix just got better. And I was like, what
Wow.
the heck? Like, I oh my God, like, am I ever going to get to that point? So,
That's amazing.
yeah.
Well, it sounds like you have
really
gotten to
is.
that point. It's definitely in like those like voodoo low end things for sure. But yeah, I've done that also of like nudging strings because like just the attack is too slow on the bow. Like it makes sense.
Yeah.
Like
yeah.
it doesn't necessarily hit.
Yep.
Yeah, timing.
But
As a
I'm
bass
sure
player,
there's things.
you're probably so aware of those like subtle timing things. Like I feel like
Yeah,
that's,
but I think sometimes you take a big multi-track and there's so many elements, and it's like there's something that could be better, but you don't catch it because there's just so much you're thinking
Right.
about anyways, and it's like, And you didn't know, like, well, if you would have just moved the congas a little bit, they would have just locked in, and I would have made the mix better, you know. So I wish I could just always have an automatic list of that to do,
Right.
you know, like, oh, nudge your strings, nudge this, you know, line up this, and because sometimes we miss them if they're not obvious, you know.
Right. So sometimes it's good to have Dave Pensado on the back couch to give you that objective, third party opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or just pay him to sit back there every day.
The royal Dave Pensado, like or just time as an objectifier, to give you that objectivity or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, totally. It's amazing. Amazing. So Bob, I just have one more question that I ask everybody on the show. Just looking back on your journey, was there something that you maybe did or didn't do that you said, Bob, this is what you got it, this has got you where you needed to go, or maybe Bob, this is the thing that held you back, and you'd want to impart on listeners maybe more at the beginning of their journey. What would be that kind of like one piece of advice?
The held you back one is the one I can answer. The other one's probably a lot more difficult, and maybe I don't realize. But the holding yourself back personality wise, in my early days, I got out here and I did a horn session for one of my regular clients recording horns, and he had a really nice project studio. And I used to have this thing through college and when I first got out here of when I'm hyper focused, I had this like kind of scowl thing on my eyebrows, and I looked mad or frustrated or angry, and I wasn't. I was just focused on what I was doing, and I didn't realize I was doing that. And I was also I grew up kind of a shy person. I wasn't very outgoing, and I would get in these sessions and not say a word. So I would be this quiet guy who looked angry, even though I wasn't. And I wasn't talkative, and I don't know, I was just kind of a bump on a log. And so my personality was hurting me. And I found this out, luckily, because a mutual friend of this producer caught wind of the guy saying, like, yeah, he does good engineering, but like it just wasn't fun to have him on the session. He looked upset, and and later on I was like, wait, I looked upset? I wasn't upset. And I had to kind of look at myself and realize, that my personality during those sessions was affecting everything. And I fixed that. And that guy, the second time, luckily he hired me a second time. And I came in there with a total different attitude, conscious of how I was acting, all that stuff. It's like your personality, how you vibe with people, how you can adapt to people.
Yeah.
It's a very, very important thing. And there's a lot of psychology that goes into the music world. And you can get on a session and totally not vibe with someone, and there's just this rub. And it's like, oh, well, we shouldn't be on sessions together because our personalities just don't flow together. But you can be doing a disservice to yourself as well. Like if you're always combative about things that are musical, and you're combative about just everything, like the more flowing you are, the more adaptive you are, the better. I think that's something an engineer, just the keyword adaptive, to situations. I have different not different personalities, but different things that I will suppress or highlight depending on the client. And it's not really a conscious thing. It's probably more subconscious, but you can act a little sillier and joke around a little more with certain clients, and other clients you got to just kind of be, the quiet engineer that just gets his job done, and so having that adaptability, I think, is important. And if you don't have it, it can seriously hold you back, because people don't want to have a person that looks angry or has a bad attitude or smells bad, doesn't have good hygiene. And so, as far as holding yourself back, you gotta look at yourself first and foremost, and then look at the other stuff later. Like, oh, you don't own the right gear, and you don't have enough plugins. It's like all that stuff is probably not as important as just being someone that's good to hang with. Like we said earlier, people want to hire their friends, so you can't be someone's friend if you don't have the right attitude.
Right. If they don't want to hang out with you, you're not going to be their friend. And that's
Exactly. So you're not going to do their sessions. You're not going to, work on their projects and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, totally. I totally resonate with the chameleon thing. Like I've definitely been in sessions where like you could feel it out, and it's just like, okay, I need to be more chill, or
Yeah. Yeah.
like, oh, I could, if I joke, it'll lighten the mood, and self-deprecation, that kind of thing is always fun. Depending
Yeah.
on the artist and depending on the vibe. So like, yeah. One thing I think I have good is the emotional intelligence, that EQ that people talk about, and I feel like that's like
Yeah. Yeah.
that's a very powerful tool in the studio. Of just feeling
For
that
sure.
out.
For sure.
Yeah. So that's great. That's a great piece of advice, man. Bob, this is great. I learned so much, and you're an inspiration. So thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I really appreciate it.
Man, thanks for having me be a part of it. Yeah, it's fun.
It's a pleasure.